Hello everyone, I am Alessandro and I am an actor. I'm from Italy, Sardinia, and I really like to improve my English. So I decided to record some tales, audiobooks in English language. I still do this in my language, in Italian language, but I want to grow up my skills. So if you are English or if you speak English better than me, and if you want to give me some correction and suggest, I'm here for you. Okay, let's begin with some tales from the Tales of Beedle the Bard by J.K. Rowling. Thank you for the listening. 4. Babbitty, Rabbitty, and her Cackling Stump. A long time ago, in a far-off land, there lived a foolish king who decided that he alone should have the power of magic. He therefore commanded the head of his army to form a brigade of witch hunters and issued them with a pack of ferocious black hounds. At the same time, the king caused proclamation to be read in every village and town across the land. Wanted by the king an instructor in magic. No true witch or wizard dared volunteer for the post, for they were all in hiding from the brigade of witch hunters. However, a cunning charlatan with no magical power saw a chance of enriching himself and arrived at the palace claiming to be a wizard of enormous skill. The charlatan performed a few simple tricks, which convinced the foolish king of his magical powers, and was immediately appointed Grand Sorcerer-in-Chief, the king's private magic master. The charlatan bade the king give him a large sack of gold so that he might purchase wands and other magical necessities. He also requested several large rubies to be used in the casting of curative charms, and a silver chalice or two for the storing and maturing of potions. All these things the foolish king supplied. The charlatan stowed the treasure safely in his own house and returned to the palace grounds. He did not know that he was being watched by an old woman who lived in a hovel on the edge of the grounds. Her name was Babbitty, and she was the washerwoman who kept the palace linen soft, fragrant, and white. Peeping from behind her drying sheets, Babbitty saw the charlatan snap two twigs from one of the king's trees and disappear into the palace. The charlatan gave one of the twigs to the king and assured him that it was a wand of tremendous power. "It will only work, however," said the charlatan, "when you are worthy of it." Every morning the charlatan and the foolish king walked out into the palace ground, where they waved their wands and shouted nonsense at the sky. The charlatan was careful to perform more tricks, so that the king remained convinced of his grand sorcery skill and of the power of the wands that had cost so much gold. One morning, as the charlatan and the foolish king were trilling their twigs and hopping in circles and chanting meaningless rhymes aloud, the Cackling reached the king's ears. Babbitty the washerwoman was watching the king and the charlatan from the window of their teeny cottage, and was laughing so hard she soon sank off the side, too weak to stand. "I must look most undignified to make the old washerwoman laugh so," said the king. He ceased the sopping and twig twirling and a frown, and "I grew weary of practice. When shall I be ready to perform real spells in front of my subject sorcerers?" The charlatan tried to soothe the pupil, assuring him that he would soon be capable of astonishing feats of magic, but Babbitty's cackling had stung the foolish king more than the charlatan knew. "Tomorrow," said the king, "we shall invite our court to watch their king perform magic." The charlatan saw that the time had come to take his treasure and flee. "Alas, your majesty, it is impossible. I have forgotten to tell your majesty that I must set out on a long journey tomorrow. If you leave this palace without my permission, sorcerer, my brigade of witch hunters will hunt you down with their hounds. Tomorrow morning you will assist me to perform magic for the benefit of my lords and ladies, and if anybody laughs at me, I shall have you beheaded." The king stormed back to the palace, leaving the charlatan alone and afraid. Not only his cunning could save him now, for he could not run away, nor could he help the king with magic that neither of them knew. Seeking a vent for his fear and his hunger, the charlatan approached the window of Babbitty the washerwoman. Peering inside, he saw the little old lady sitting at her table, polishing a wand. In a corner behind her, the king's sheets were washing themselves in a wooden tub. The charlatan understood at once that Babbitty was a true witch, and that she who had given him his awful problem could also solve it. "Gron!" roared the charlatan. "Your cackling has cost me dear. If you fail to help me, I shall denounce you as a witch, and I will be you as a torn apart by the king's hounds." Old Babbitty smiled at the charlatan and assured that she would do everything in her power to help. The charlatan instructed her to conceal herself inside a bush while the king gave his magical display, and to perform the king's spells for him. Without his knowledge, Babbitty agreed to a plan, but asked one question. "What, sir, if the king attempts a spell Babbitty cannot perform?" The charlatan scoffed. "Your magic is more than equal to that fool's imagination," he assured her, and he retired to the castle, well pleased with his own cleverness. The following morning all the lords and ladies of the kingdom assembled in the palace grounds. The king climbed on the stage in front of them, with the charlatan by his side. "I shall firstly make this lady disappear," cried the king, pointing his twig at the noble woman. From inside a bush nearby, Babbitty pointed her wand at the hat and caused it to vanish. Great was the astonishment and admiration of the crowd, and louder applause for the jubilant king. "Next, I shall make that horse fly," cried the king, pointing his twig at his own steed. From inside the bush, Babbitty pointed her wand at the horse, and it rose high into the air. The crowd was still more thrilled and amazed, and they roared in appreciation for their magical king. "And now," said the king, looking all around for an idea, and the captain of his brigade of witch hunters ran forwards. "Your Majesty," said the captain, "this very morning Sabre died of eating a poisonous toadstool. Bring him back to life, your Majesty, with your wand." And the captain held on the stage the lifeless body of the largest of the witch-hunting hounds. The foolish king brandished his twig and pointed at the dead dog, but inside the bush Babbitty smiled, and did not trouble to lift her wand, for no magic can rise the dead. When the dog did not stir, the crowd began first to whisper, and then to laugh. They suspected that the king's first 2 fits had been mere tricks after all. "Why, it doesn't work!" the king screamed at the charlatan, who bethought himself of the only ruse left to him. There, your Majesty, there!" he shouted, pointing at the bush where Babbitty sat concealed. "I see her plain, a wicked witch who is blocking your magic with her own evil spells. Seize her! Somebody seize her!" Babbitty fled from the bush, and the brigade of witch hunters set off in pursuit, unleashing their hounds, who bayed for Babbitty's blood. But as she reached a low hedge, the little witch vanished from sight, and when the king, the charlatan, and all the courtiers gained the other side, they found a pack of witch-hunting hounds barking and scrabbling around a bent and haggard tree. "She had turned herself into a tree!" screamed the charlatan, and, dreading less, Babbitty turned back into a woman, denouncing he had dead. "Cut her down, your majesty, that is the way to treat evil witch!" An axe was brought at once, and the whole tree was felled to loud cheers from the courtiers and the charlatan. However, as they were making ready to return to the palace, the sound of loud cackling stopped them in their tracks. "Fools!" cried the Babbitty voice from the stump they had left behind. "No witch or wizard can be killed by being cut in half. Take the axe if you do not believe me, and cut the grand sorcerer in two." The captain of the brigade of witch hunters was eager to make the experiment, but as he raised the axe, the charlatan fell to his knees, screaming for mercy and confessing all his weakness. As he was dragged away to the dungeons, the three stumps cackled more loudly than ever. "By cutting a witch in half, you have unleashed a dreadful curse upon your kingdom," it told the petrified king. "Henceforth, every stroke of harm that you inflict upon my fellow witches and wizards will feel like an axe stroking your own side until you will wish you could die of it." At that, the king fell to his knees too, and told the stump that we would issue a proclamation at once, protecting all the witches and wizards of the kingdom and allowing them to practice their magic in peace. "Very good," said the stump, "but you have not yet made amends to Babbitty." Anything at all," cried the foolish king, wringing his hands before the stump. "You will erect a statue of Babbitty upon me, in memory of your poor washerwoman, and to remind you forever of your own foolishness," said the stump. The king agreed to it at once, and promised to engage the foremost sculptor in the land, and have the statue made of pure gold. Then the shamed king and all the noblemen and women returned to the palace, leaving the tree stump cackling behind them. When the grounds were deserted once more, there wriggled from a hole between the roots of the tree stump a stout and whiskery old rabbit with a wand clumped between her teeth. Babbitty hopped out of the grounds and far away, and ever after a golden statue of the washerwoman stood up on the tree stump, and no witch or wizard was ever persecuted in the kingdom again. Albus Dumbledore on Babbitty, Rabbitty and her cackling stump. The story of Babbitty, Rabbitty and her cackling stump is, in many ways, the most real of Beedle's tales, in that the magic described in the story conforms almost entirely to no magical laws. It was through this story that many of us first discovered that magic could not bring back the dead, and a great disappointment and shock it was, convincing that we had been as young children, that our parents would be able to awaken our dead rats and cats with one wave of their wands. Through some 6 centuries of elapsed, Beedle wrote this tale, and while we have devised innumerable ways of maintaining the illusion of our loved ones' continuing presence, wizards still have not found a way of reuniting body and soul once death has occurred. as the eminent wizard and philosopher Bertrand de Pensée Profonde writes in his celebrated work A Study into the Possibility of Reversing the Actual and the Metaphysical Effects of Natural Death, with particular regard to the reintegration of essence and matter, give it up. It's never going to happen. The tale of Babbitty Rabbitty does, however, give us one of the earliest literary mention of animagus, for Babbitty the washerwoman is possessed of the rare magical ability to transform into an animal wheel. Animagi make up a small fraction of the wizarding population. Achieving perfect, spontaneous human-to-animal transformation requires much study and practice, and many witches and wizards consider that their time might be better employed in other ways. Certainly the application of such a talent is limited unless one has a great need of this guise of concealment. It is for this reason that the Ministry of Magic has insisted upon a register of animagi, for there can be no doubt that this kind of magic is of greatest use to those engaged in surreptitious, covert, or even criminal activity. Whether there was ever a washerwoman who was able to transform into a rabbit is open to doubt. However, some magical historians have suggested Beedle modeled Babbitty on the famous French sorceress Lisette de Lapin, who was convicted of witchcraft in Paris in 1422. To the astonishment of her Muggle guards, who were later tried for helping the witch to escape, Lisette vanished from her prison cell the night before she was due to be executed. Although it has never been proven that Lisette was an animagus who managed to squeeze through the bars of her cell window, a large white rabbit was subsequently seen crossing the English Channel in a cauldron with a sail fixed to it, and a similar rabbit later became a trusted advisor at the court of King Henry VI. The king in Beedle's story is a foolish muggle who both covets and fears magic. He believes that he can become a wizard simply by learning incantation and waving a wand. He is completely ignorant of the true nature of magic and wizards, and therefore swallows the preposterous suggestion of both the charlatan and Babbitty. This is certainly typical of a particular type of muggle thinking. In their ignorance, they are prepared to accept all sorts of impossibilities about magic, including the proposition that Babbitty has turned herself into a tree that can still think and talk. It is worth nothing at this point, however, that while Beedle used the talking tree device to show us how ignorant the Muggle King is, he also asks us to believe that Babbitty can talk while she is a rabbit. This might be poetic license, but I think it more likely that Beedle had only heard about animagi and never met one, for this is the only liberty that he takes with the magical laws in the story. Animagi do not retain the power of human speech while in their animal form, although they keep all their human thinking and reasoning power. This is how every school child knows is the fundamental difference between being an animagus and transfiguring oneself into an animal. In the case of the latter, one will become the animal entirely, with the consequence that one will know no magic, be unaware that one had ever been a wizard, and will need somebody else to transfigure one back to one's original form. I think it possible that in choosing to make his heroine pretend to turn into a tree and threaten the king with pain, like an axe stroking his own side, Beedle was inspired by real magical traditions and practices. Trees with one quality would have always been fiercely protected by the wand makers who tend them, and cutting down such trees to steal them risks incurring not only the malice of the bowtruckles usually nesting there, but also the ill effect of any protective curses placed around them by their owners. In Beedle's time, the Crusatus cures had not yet been made legal by the Ministry of Magic and could have produced precisely the sensation with which Babbitty threatens the king.